Emily Parker always believed her wedding day would be the happiest moment of her life. Every detail, from the lace on her gown to the scent of fresh roses lining the aisle, had been meticulously planned. Yet, on the morning of this long-awaited event, her beloved dog, Baxter, refused to step aside. His unwavering gaze and insistent bark were more than mere jitters. Within minutes, Emily sensed an unspoken warning that shattered her perfect plans and her heart. In the midst of white satin dreams and gilded invitations, she found herself facing a truth she never expected. This is their story. Emily Parker had always been a nurturer at heart. Growing up in a small town outside Seattle, near the scenic Lake Sammamish, she'd spent her childhood roaming the expansive backyard of her grandmother's home. The orchard behind the modest house was Emily's kingdom. She would climb apple trees, gather wild blackberries, and invent elaborate fantasies about fairies hidden beneath the tall grass. Even as a child, Emily was partial to bringing home stray animals. Injured birds, wandering cats, or the occasional lost puppy would find refuge with her. If it had a heartbeat and needed a home, Emily was determined to help. Her grandmother, the patient soul that she was, encouraged every rescue mission, recognizing the love in her granddaughter's eyes. So it was no surprise to anyone when Emily, at the age of 25, adopted Baxter from a nearby rescue shelter. He was a scruffy, wiry-haired mutt with soulful brown eyes that seemed to hold the entire weight of the world. Right away, Emily felt a connection that pulsed through her as if Baxter had chosen her, not the other way around. From that moment, Baxter became an integral part of Emily's daily life and the guardian of her heart. Fast forward 3 years, and Emily found herself living in a small studio apartment near Pike Place Market. The bustle of downtown Seattle woke her each morning, the smell of fresh coffee and salty sea air drifting through the window. She had graduated from the University of Washington with a degree in social work and had poured her heart into her career at a local non-profit. There, she spent her days helping disadvantaged families find stable housing, counseling teens in crisis, and advocating for fair employment practices. Through it all, Baxter was at her side, a constant source of unconditional love. After work, they would walk together along the waterfront, passing tourists marveling at the flying fish stands and artisanal crafts. His ears would perk up at the chatter of gulls, and Emily would often treat him to a tiny pup cup of whipped cream from the Starbucks on First Avenue, a small indulgence she justified by the immeasurable joy it brought. Life was a familiar blend of routine and small adventures, one that Emily cherished deeply. Little did she know that one day a charismatic newcomer named Ryan Taylor would appear in her life like a bolt of lightning, shifting every foundation she'd meticulously laid. Ryan Taylor was everything Emily never knew she wanted. He was charming, confident, and carried an air of effortless optimism that drew people in. She first met him at a fundraising gala hosted by her non-profit organization at the Museum of Pop Culture. It was a night of elegant dresses, clinking champagne glasses, and hushed conversations surrounding the silent auction tables. Emily had been wearing a sleek, black dress borrowed from her best friend. She felt slightly out of place among the impeccably dressed crowd, focusing instead on her role as an organizer. That's when Ryan approached her. He complimented her on the event, remarking on how impressive the turnout was, and offered to buy a piece of sports memorabilia he knew would generate even more funds for the cause. Emily remembered his eyes sparkling under the soft lights, his gentle smile putting her instantly at ease. Before she knew it, they were talking about their shared passions, community service, the arts, and a curious fascination with the city's grunge music history. By the time the gala ended, they had exchanged phone numbers and parted with an unspoken understanding that something significant had just begun. Neither could have anticipated how swiftly it would progress. Over the following weeks, Ryan courted Emily with an old-fashioned sincerity she found both surprising and utterly disarming. He planned thoughtful dates, bike rides through Discovery Park, a ferry trip to Bainbridge Island to watch the sunset, and late-night strolls through Capitol Hill. Each moment felt like a scene out of a romantic movie, with Ryan always finding ways to show he was genuinely interested in her life and her passion for helping others. Emily, who had been single for a while and somewhat cynical about modern dating, found her heart opening like a blooming flower. She confided in her closest friend, Ava, that she felt more alive than she had in years. "He's different," she would say, her cheeks tinged with a blush that betrayed her excitement. Even Baxter, who had never fully warmed up to the men Emily had previously dated, seemed to tolerate Ryan's presence. Baxter would let Ryan pet him, and on rare occasions, the dog would lay his head on Ryan's lap. The acceptance wasn't resounding, but it was a start. As the months went by, Emily and Ryan's bond grew stronger, woven by shared laughter, tearful confessions, and quiet nights lost in each other's company. The turning point came at a charity dog walk event hosted at Green Lake Park. Emily had organized the fundraiser to benefit her non-profit, aiming to raise awareness about homeless youth in the city. Ryan, ever supportive, arrived early to help set up booths and distribute flyers. Families, couples, and proud pet owners congregated on the green grass under the late spring sunshine. Baxter trotted along happily, wagging his tail with cautious curiosity as strangers petted him. In the middle of the event, Ryan emerged from behind a group of colorful balloons, holding a small velvet box. Emily's heart practically leaped out of her chest when he dropped to one knee. People around them paused, forming a circle of anticipation. Baxter, sensing the shift in energy, began barking excitedly. Ryan opened the box to reveal a modest diamond ring. It wasn't large or flashy, but it glimmered with sincerity. "Emily Parker," he said, voice trembling ever so slightly, "I love you. You've shown me the beauty of selflessness, of caring for people and creatures in need. Will you marry me?" Tears of joy pooled in Emily's eyes as she nodded, words momentarily lost. The crowd cheered and Baxter barked as though offering his own blessing. Wedding preparations commenced immediately. Emily, who had never been one for grand displays, found herself flipping through bridal magazines and Pinterest boards, trying to envision a day that reflected both her passions and her personality. She chose a venue near the shores of Lake Union, a simple yet elegant waterside pavilion where the distant silhouettes of seaplanes and sailboats would provide a picturesque backdrop. The date was set for early summer, giving them just enough time to iron out the details. Ryan insisted on handling much of the organization, claiming he wanted Emily to experience the joy of being an engaged woman without the weight of planning responsibilities. At first, Emily was touched by his eagerness. She chose her wedding gown at a boutique in downtown Seattle, a lace design that reminded her of vintage elegance. She asked Ava to be her maid of honor, and her grandmother, though frail, beamed with pride at the thought of witnessing her granddaughter's special day. Through all of this excitement, one tiny detail began to gnaw at Emily: Baxter's changing demeanor. The dog, usually so intuitive and calm, grew restless, whining at odd hours and often placing himself between Emily and Ryan with a protective stance. The closer they drew to the wedding, the more pronounced Baxter's behavior became. He began to bark whenever Ryan knocked on the apartment door, something he had never done before. Initially, Emily tried to dismiss it as anxiety over the changing environment, wedding invitations piling up, suit fittings, cake tastings, and the general upheaval of routine. Yet she couldn't shake the sense that Baxter was trying to tell her something. It was as though he perceived a shift in the emotional atmosphere, an undercurrent Emily herself wasn't fully aware of. She confided in Ava, who brushed it off as normal dog behavior in response to stress. Even Ryan seemed slightly unnerved, but chalked it up to Baxter being jealous of how much time the couple was spending away from home. Still, Emily remembered all too well how Baxter had a knack for sensing her moods, her fears, and even the heartbreak of others. In her line of work, she'd seen him sidle up to children in distress, offering a silent comfort. She couldn't fathom why he would suddenly become wary of Ryan, a man who'd been kind and supportive. As the wedding date approached, the tension between Baxter and Ryan quietly escalated. On the morning of the wedding, the sun rose in a blaze of pink and orange, casting a warm glow over the city. Emily woke up in the guest room at AVA's house, nerves a mix of excitement and trepidation. She tried to calm herself with deep breaths, reminding herself that the day would go smoothly. Her dress hung in the corner, a vision of lace and satin that stirred in her an odd blend of joy and apprehension. Baxter, who had stayed the night with them, paced the hallway outside her room. Every time Emily emerged, he would stand in front of her, tail low, eyes serious. It felt like he was physically trying to block her from leaving. Ava noticed the dog's strange behavior and offered to walk him, hoping the exercise might settle his nerves. But Baxter refused to budge from Emily's side. As a last resort, Ava suggested placing him in the backyard temporarily, giving Emily space to dress and prepare. The ceremony was scheduled for late afternoon, and they had hours to transform themselves and travel to the venue. Emily couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something was amiss, a sensation amplified by Baxter's uncharacteristic protectiveness. The wedding venue at Lake Union was adorned with soft rose petals, white ribbons, and floating lanterns planned for the evening. Rows of chairs faced a simple altar, backed by panoramic windows overlooking the shimmering water. Classical music gently wafted through hidden speakers, and the aroma of lilies filled the air. Guests trickled in, taking their seats, chatting excitedly about how the bride and groom were a perfect match. Emily arrived in a limousine rented from a local company, her stomach twisted in knots that felt too tight to be simple jitters. Baxter sat beside her, courtesy of a special arrangement she'd insisted upon. She couldn't imagine leaving him behind on such an important day. The moment the car door opened, Baxter jumped out, positioning himself between Emily and the entrance to the pavilion. He wouldn't move, barking insistently, as if trying to form a barrier. Wedding coordinators, family members and friends looked on in confusion. Emily knelt down, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. "What's wrong, buddy?" she whispered. "It's my wedding day. I need you to trust me." Yet the dog refused to be swayed. As tension crackled in the air, Emily became acutely aware of the uneasy glances around her. In the flurry of confusion, Ryan appeared at the door, looking every bit the dashing groom in his tailored suit. His smile, however, faltered when he saw Baxter barring Emily's path. "Is everything all right?" he asked, stepping forward. Baxter responded with a sharp bark, bristling at Ryan's proximity. Emily felt a stab of embarrassment as guests began to murmur. She tried to coax Baxter away, gently tugging on his leash. He wouldn't budge. Ryan's face turned a shade of red as he attempted to lead Emily inside. Suddenly, Baxter nipped at Ryan's shoe, a warning nip, not a full-blown bite, but enough to send gasps through the crowd. Emily's heart pounded in her ears. Baxter had never shown aggression like this before. She apologized profusely, face flushed, while Ryan stepped back, his expression clouded with frustration. For the first time, Emily saw anger flash in Ryan's eyes, an intensity that unsettled her. He muttered something under his breath and gestured for a friend to take Baxter away. Unsure of what else to do, Emily allowed her dog to be led off to a secluded corner of the venue. Yet, deep down, she sensed this moment was a harbinger of something much darker. As the ceremony began, a hush fell over the pavilion. The music swelled, and Emily walked down the aisle, arm in arm with her grandmother. Her chest felt tight, thoughts drifting to Baxter. She told herself that maybe he was just acting out of separation anxiety, but a flicker of doubt lingered. When she reached the altar, Ryan took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. For a fleeting second, everything seemed right, the warm glow of the setting sun, the gentle hum of the city in the background, the supportive faces of friends and family. The officiant began to speak, and Emily's gaze travelled across the gathered crowd. At the far side, near a cluster of potted ferns, she spotted Baxter sitting quietly, ears alert, watching her intently. For reasons she couldn't fully explain, seeing him there made her chest tighten. It felt like he was pleading with her to understand something invisible yet crucial. Emily tried to focus on the officiant's words, but her ears rang and her vision blurred. A wave of dizziness hit her, and for a moment she thought she might collapse. Then came the vows, and she had to steady herself with a trembling breath. Just as Ryan opened his mouth to say, "I do," a loud bark sliced through the solemn atmosphere. Heads turned. Baxter had broken free from the corner and sprinted toward the altar. Chaos followed. Guests gasped and shuffled. Emily's grandmother almost stood from her seat, ready to intervene. The ring-bearer stumbled. Baxter skidded to a stop, placing himself squarely between Emily and Ryan, shoulders hunched defensively, as though warding off a threat. Ryan's face twisted in outrage. In a flash, his composure cracked. He hissed something at the dog, a venomous phrase Emily had never heard him use before, filled with an anger that made her blood run cold. Gone was the suave, caring man she'd fallen in love with. In that instant, she saw a darkness in Ryan's eyes that rattled her more than any bark or bite could. The officiant paused, uncertain how to proceed. Emily bent down to Baxter's level, confusion and worry swirling in her chest. "What is going on?" she whispered, tears pooling in her eyes. Baxter let out a soft whine, pressing against her. That was when it struck her like a thunderclap. This dog, her loyal companion, was trying to protect her from a danger she'd overlooked. Time seemed to slow as Emily rose to her feet. She locked eyes with Ryan, searching for the reassuring warmth she'd known. Instead, she found only hostility. The hush in the pavilion felt suffocating. Every guest waiting for the next move. "Ryan, what did you just say?" Emily asked softly, her voice quivering. He didn't respond immediately, his jaw tight. Then he forced a thin smile and replied, "It's nothing, Em. He's ruining our wedding. Can't you see that?" That simple statement, dripping with contempt, shattered the image Emily had held of Ryan. A sinking feeling took root in her stomach, a despair so profound she could barely breathe. She looked at Ava, who was standing among the bridesmaids, her eyes wide with alarm. Slowly, Emily backed away, still holding Baxter close. "Something's not right," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. The officiant cleared his throat, asking if they should proceed. Emily glanced around at the sea of concerned faces, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it echo in her skull. In a trembling voice, she asked everyone for a moment alone, an intermission, if you will, so she could gather her thoughts. The stunned congregation reluctantly dispersed, stepping outside for fresh air. In a private room adjacent to the pavilion, Emily, Ava, and Ryan gathered while Baxter stood guard near the door. Tension rippled in the silence. Emily looked at Ryan, tears in her eyes, and asked him to explain his outburst. "I'm stressed, okay?" he snapped. "I just want our day to be perfect, and your dog is ruining everything." The anger in his voice startled even Ava, who took a step back. Emily tried to remain calm, but the sight of Ryan's tightly clenched fists set her on edge. She pleaded for him to be truthful. "Is there something going on that I don't know about?" she asked, voice trembling. Ryan deflected, insisting that everything was fine, that they were just experiencing normal wedding day nerves. But Emily knew Baxter's instincts were rarely wrong. She pressed further, frustration and fear battling for control. Then, in a moment of desperation, she demanded to see his phone, convinced that the truth might be hidden there. Ryan balked, face flushed red with indignation. "You don't trust me," he spat, ignoring the irony of the moment. Still in her wedding gown, Emily stood her ground, unwavering, though her heart threatened to break. "I need to know," she whispered. Reluctantly, Ryan unlocked his phone and handed it over with a glare that spoke volumes. Emily's hands shook as she navigated his messages. Ava stood by her side, her expression pained yet supportive. Baxter let out a low whine, as though bracing for impact. The phone was quiet at first, innocuous conversations with friends, random group texts. Then Emily noticed a series of messages with a contact named Michelle Work. She clicked, and her blood turned to ice. The messages were explicit, detailing an affair that had been ongoing for months. Ryan had made promises to Michelle, promises of a future together once he'd figured out how to break things off with Emily. Paragraphs of intimate confessions, longing, and a life that excluded the very woman he was about to marry were all spelled out in damning clarity. Emily felt the world tilt. Her breath came in ragged gasps, tears spilling onto her bouquet. Ava's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a horrified gasp. Ryan tried to snatch the phone back, muttering excuses, talking about how it was a mistake, how it meant nothing. But the evidence was undeniable. Each word on the screen confirmed everything Baxter had been trying to warn her about. Shock washed over Emily, leaving her numb and shaking. She stared at Ryan, her voice lost in the storm of betrayal that thundered through her mind. This man, whom she had believed to be compassionate, honorable, and dedicated, was a hollow shell of deception. She couldn't reconcile the Ryan who proposed in front of hundreds of people at Green Lake Park with the man whose vile secrets now lay exposed. "You were going to marry me with this?" She managed to sputter, gesturing to the phone. Ryan stammered, claiming he loved her, that he just got cold feet, that it was only a fleeting mistake. Every word felt like salt in a gaping wound. Ava stepped in, anger flashing in her eyes, demanding Ryan leave. But Emily stopped her, though tears continued to stream down her cheeks. She needed clarity, closure. In a tremulous voice, she asked Ryan if he ever loved her, if any part of their relationship was real. He looked away, unable to meet her gaze. His silence spoke volumes. At that moment, Emily realized something else. Baxter had sensed this darkness all along. She had dismissed it as mere anxiety, never imagining it could unveil the biggest betrayal of her life. Outside, guests were still milling about, unsure of what was happening. Word had spread of a hiccup in the ceremony. Anxiety rippled through the crowd, with Emily's grandmother seated, an expression of deep concern etched onto her withered features. Emily took a moment to steady herself. She removed the engagement ring from her finger, its sparkle now reminding her of a cheap trick rather than a symbol of genuine love. In the quiet tension of that private room, she handed the ring back to Ryan, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I can't do this," she whispered, the phrase echoing in the hush. Ryan said nothing, his face pale as though he might protest or plead, but any words of reconciliation felt hollow now, overshadowed by the truth that had torn them apart. At that moment, Baxter nuzzled her hand, offering comfort in the way only a devoted dog could. The significance of his warning struck her like a tidal wave. He had tried to shield her, sacrificing his own gentle nature to reveal the lie she was about to legally bind herself to. With her resolve trembling but intact, Emily made the decision that would alter her future forever. Stepping into the main pavilion felt like entering a stage where a silent audience awaited a performance they never wanted. Emily's veil was askew, her makeup smudged from tears, and the pain in her eyes told everyone that something catastrophic had occurred. She could sense hundreds of eyes on her, each pair brimming with concern and confusion. Ava followed a step behind, holding Baxter's leash. The officiant looked at her with a mix of empathy and apprehension, uncertain how to proceed. For a moment, Emily stood at the front of the assembled crowd, speechless. She glanced at the empty spot beside her, where Ryan should have been. Summoning every ounce of strength, she cleared her throat. "I'm sorry," she began, voice quivering. "There won't be a wedding today." Gasps rippled through the gathering. Murmurs broke out as people tried to make sense of the abrupt announcement. Emily paused, her thoughts whirling. She felt the walls closing in, the intensity of the situation nearly suffocating. But then she felt the soft brush of Baxter against her leg, and it grounded her, reminding her of what truly mattered. Gently, she lifted her gaze and continued, "I found out some terrible news, and I can't go through with this. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. I'm sorry for everything." A wave of empathy flowed through the crowd. Family members stood. Friends began to gather. Tears appeared in the eyes of those who truly loved Emily. Her grandmother clutched her cane, trembling as she watched her granddaughter endure a heartbreak so profound it was almost visible. Emily tried to maintain composure, tried to keep from breaking down into sobs. The wedding coordinator discreetly signaled to the band to stop playing. Caterers exchanged glances, uncertain whether to begin packing up the wedding cake and canapes. Then, amidst the thick tension, Ava stepped forward. She placed a hand on Emily's shoulder and simply said, "We're here for you." The words struck a chord deep within Emily's heart, reminding her that she wasn't alone in this catastrophe. Though humiliated and shattered, she realized that she had a network of love and support to help guide her through the aftermath. People began to come up to her, offering hugs, words of comfort, and tears of sympathy. Even though Emily's world had just imploded, the outpouring of support felt like a cushion against the free fall. And in that swirl of heartbreak, she noticed Baxter, looking up at her with eyes that said, "I've got you, no matter what." In the hours that followed, Ryan quietly slipped away, likely unable to face the repercussions of his actions. Emily didn't try to stop him. She was too numb to feel anger yet, too overwhelmed to process the future. The wedding guests, after offering their condolences, began to leave, each departure echoing the symbolic unraveling of what should have been a joyous day. Ava insisted Emily come home with her. She wasn't going to let her friend spend her first night of heartbreak alone. Emily agreed, clinging to Ava's kindness like a lifeline. Baxter trailed alongside them, tail lowered, almost as though he understood the weight of the situation. As they left the pavilion, Emily took one last glance at the elegant decorations, the half-burnt candles and the uncut wedding cake. It felt like she was abandoning a world she had meticulously planned for. The ride home was silent. Ava drove, occasionally throwing worried glances at Emily in the rearview mirror. Baxter rested his head on Emily's lap, a warm presence that offered more solace than any words could. The city lights flickered past, a cascade of neon reflections across Emily's tear-stained face. She felt as though she was floating in a dream, or rather, a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. That night, in Ava's living room, Emily sat on the couch, still in her wedding gown. The delicate lace that once made her feel beautiful now felt suffocating against her skin. She stared off into space, her mind replaying the day's events on an endless loop. Baxter curled up at her feet, refusing to leave her side. Ava emerged from the kitchen with a cup of chamomile tea, setting it gently on the coffee table. "I don't even know where to start," Emily whispered, voice hoarse from crying. Ava knelt beside her, placing a hand on Emily's knee. "Start wherever you can. You don't have to figure everything out tonight, or tomorrow, or even next week. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes again. She wanted to rage, to scream about the injustice of it all. Instead, she managed a broken sob. "How could I have been so blind?" she choked out. Ava hesitated, then responded softly, "We see what we want to see when we're in love, Em. It's not your fault. He lied, and you believed him because you're a loving, trusting person." Emily glanced down at Baxter. "He always knew," she murmured. "I should have listened to him." The days that followed were a haze of phone calls, cancelled contracts, and awkward conversations. The news spread quickly among friends and colleagues. Emily's phone lit up with messages of condolences, but she had neither the strength nor the desire to respond. She was placed on compassionate leave at work, her supervisor gently advising her to take time to heal. She spent most of her days in sweatpants, hair unwashed, face blotchy from intermittent crying spells. Baxter remained her constant companion, trailing after her as she moved from couch to bedroom, bedroom to kitchen, and back. At times, the mere sight of him would trigger a fresh wave of tears, tears of gratitude that he had tried to protect her, and tears of regret that she hadn't paid closer attention. Her grandmother visited one afternoon, carrying a pot of homemade chicken soup and a framed photograph of Emily as a child. Together, they sat and flipped through old family albums, silent tears rolling down Emily's cheeks as she realized how different life could have been had she recognized the signs earlier. "You're stronger than you think," her grandmother said, pressing the photograph into Emily's hand. "And you have people who love you. Don't forget that." An unexpected shift began to occur as Emily processed her grief. The sorrow that had once felt like an impenetrable fog started to recede, bit by bit, replaced by a slow burning anger and a thirst for truth. She wanted answers, closure, and a plan to move forward. Late one night, after unsuccessfully trying to sleep, she found herself scrolling through Ryan's messages again, studying every damning word. It felt masochistic, but she couldn't stop. She needed to understand the scope of his deceit. Baxter lay at the foot of her bed, ears perked, sensing her agitation. As her eyes skimmed the incriminating texts, Emily realized that Ryan had not only been unfaithful, but had also manipulated their finances in subtle ways, asking her to co-sign a lease for a place she never saw, making excuses for late payments on joint arrangements. The betrayal extended beyond the emotional realm, digging into her life's practicalities. Her heart pounded. She needed to cut all ties, ensure her name wasn't entangled in any potential financial fallout. For the first time since that dreadful day, Emily felt a spark of determination. She set the phone aside, stroked Baxter's head, and whispered, "We're going to be okay. I promise you that." In the subsequent weeks, Emily sought professional help, a therapist recommended by her supervisor at the non-profit. The sessions were daunting at first, forcing her to articulate the heartbreak and self-doubt swirling inside her. Yet, each visit brought a tiny bit of healing. She also joined a support group for individuals who had gone through broken engagements or divorces. Initially, it felt strange to sit among strangers and bear her vulnerabilities. But hearing their stories, how they navigated betrayal and loss, made her feel less alone. Outside the therapy room, Baxter played a crucial role in her emotional recovery. On her darkest days, when sorrow would threaten to drag her under, she'd take him for a walk along the waterfront. Feeling the breeze on her face, watching Baxter's tail wag at seagulls, and sipping coffee from a local cafe reminded her that life still had small joys to offer. These walks became a daily ritual, moments of reflection and connection with the world. With each passing day, her sense of self rebuilt. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind, "You're stronger than you think." And indeed, she was beginning to feel that strength, forged by heartbreak but tempered by love. 2 months after the aborted wedding, Emily stood on her apartment balcony, gazing at the pastel hues of another Seattle sunset. The breeze carried the distant hum of ferry horns and the smell of fish from the bay. Baxter sat at her feet, ears perked, as if listening to the city's symphony. In one hand, she clutched a steaming mug of peppermint tea, in the other, a pen and a small notepad. She had decided to write a letter to herself, a promise, a declaration of resilience, a vow more meaningful than any wedding pledge she'd ever taken. Carefully, she penned each word, expressing gratitude to those who supported her, acknowledging the pain that had shaped her, and celebrating the lessons she'd learned about self-worth and intuition. When she finished, the final line read, "I commit to loving myself and trusting those who prove their worth, including this four-legged guardian who taught me the truest meaning of loyalty." She set the notepad down, exhaling a long breath. Despite the heartbreak, she felt a sense of liberation and clarity. Baxter whined softly, as though in agreement. Stooping to press a kiss to his head, Emily finally understood. Sometimes the strongest bonds are the ones that shield us from a broken heart before it's too late. Emily's story stands as a testament to the unpredictability of life and the miraculous ways love can show itself even when wrapped in fur and wagging its tail. She faced betrayal on the day that should have been her happiest, only to discover that resilience often emerges from the deepest heartbreak. Her journey of self-discovery highlights the importance of listening to intuition and embracing the unwavering loyalty of those who truly care for us. Thank you for joining us on this emotional voyage. If you found hope and meaning in Emily's experience, please take a moment to like this video, share it with friends who might need comfort, and subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories. Your support allows us to continue telling powerful tales of courage and growth. Remember, trust your instincts, cherish genuine connections, and never underestimate the quiet wisdom of a devoted companion. Believe in love always.